Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Earth vessel Aurora and stared at the massive alien ship floating in space before them. The Zephyrian vessel looked like a giant crystal that someone had carved into the shape of a bird. Blue and green lights danced across its surface in patterns that hurt his eyes to look at for too long. He had seen pictures and videos, but nothing had prepared him for seeing it in person. "Captain, they are sending us docking instructions," said Lieutenant Amy Walsh from her position at the communications console. Her voice carried a mix of excitement and nervousness that Jake felt in his own chest. Jake nodded and turned to look at his small team. Dr. Lisa Carter sat at a nearby station, checking her translation equipment for the 100th time that morning. She was the best linguist Earth had, and if anyone could help them talk to the Zephyrians, it would be her. Next to her, Ben Hughes was reviewing his notes about what little they knew of alien customs. As their cultural expert, he would help them. Avoid making any terrible mistakes. "This is it, people," Jake said. "First human diplomatic mission to an alien world. Let's not mess this up." The docking process took almost an hour. The Zephyrian ship was so large that the Aurora looked like a tiny bug next to it. Jake watched through the viewports as mechanical arms that looked like they were made of living crystal reached out and gently pulled their ship into a docking bay. The whole process was smoother than most human-built systems he had used. When the airlocks finally opened, Jake got his first look at a real Zephyrian. The being was tall, maybe 7 feet, with skin that shifted between blue and green colors, like oil on water. Its face was angular with large eyes that seemed to hold tiny stars inside them. It wore robes that looked like they were woven from light itself. "Welcome, humans," the Zephyrian said in perfect English, though its voice sounded like wind chimes. "I am Ambassador Kethra. King Vorthik the Wise is eager to meet with you." Jake stepped forward and tried not to stare. "Thank you, Ambassador. I am Captain Jake Morrison. This is Dr. Lisa Carter and Ben Hughes." The Zephyrian's head tilted in what might have been a nod. "Please follow me. The journey to the capital world will take several hours. You may rest in the guest quarters we have prepared." As they walked through the corridors of the alien ship, Jake felt like he was inside a giant gemstone. The walls were translucent and filled with flowing patterns of light. Everything seemed to pulse with a gentle rhythm like a heartbeat. The floors felt solid under their feet, but looked like they were walking on frozen lightning. "Fascinating," Dr. Carter whispered as she took readings with her instruments. "The entire ship seems to be grown rather than built, like a living crystal." Ben was taking notes as fast as he could write. "Notice how they dim the lights as we approach and brighten them after we pass. The ship is responding to our presence." The guest quarters were beyond anything Jake had imagined. Each room was a sphere of crystal with furniture that seemed to flow up from the floor when needed. The beds were soft, despite looking like they were made of solid light. There were no sharp corners anywhere, and the whole space felt peaceful in a way that made Jake want to take a nap. "The king wishes to meet with you tomorrow after you have rested," Ambassador Kethra told them. "Tonight there will be a feast in your honor. Many of our people are curious about humans." After the ambassador left, Jake sat on his crystal bed and tried to process everything. 3 months ago, Earth had received a message from the Zephyrians. They had been watching human space expansion and were interested in making contact. Unlike the hostile first contact scenarios from old movies, these aliens seemed genuinely friendly. They had even included detailed instructions for building a translation device. The feast that night was held in a hall so large Jake could not see the ceiling. Hundreds of Zephyrians filled tables that seemed to be carved from single pieces of colored stone. The food was strange, but surprisingly good. Everything glowed softly, and some dishes actually sang when touched with the eating utensils. Jake found himself seated next to a young Zephyrian female who introduced herself as Princess Zaraka. She was smaller than most Zephyrians, but her skin held brighter colors that shifted more quickly. Her eyes were the deep blue of Earth's oceans, and when she smiled, Jake felt something flutter in his chest. "Tell me about your home world, Captain Morrison," she said. "We have studied your broadcasts, but I'm curious about what it feels like to live there." Jake found himself talking about Earth's seasons and weather patterns. He described snow and rain and the way sunlight looked filtering through storm clouds. Princess Zaraka listened with intense attention, asking questions about things Jake had never really thought about before. "Your world sounds chaotic," she said, but her tone made it sound like a compliment. "Here on Nexera, everything follows patterns that have been the same for thousands of years. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to experience true randomness." The conversation was interrupted when a commotion broke out at the far end of the hall. Jake saw a Zephyrian servant approaching the princess with what looked like a ceremonial cup. Something about the servant's movements struck Jake as wrong. The being was walking too stiffly, and its color patterns were not matching those of the other servants. Without thinking, Jake stood up and stepped between the servant and Princess Zaraka, just as the being pulled out what looked like a crystal dagger. Jake's military training kicked in, and he grabbed the attacker's wrist and twisted until the weapon fell to the floor. The hall erupted in chaos as guards rushed forward and seized the would-be assassin. Princess Zaraka stared at Jake with wide eyes while King Vorthik himself stood up from the high table. "How did you know?" Princess Zaraka asked in a whisper. Jake helped her to her feet, feeling embarrassed by all the attention. His walking pattern was wrong, and his skin colors were not changing naturally. In my experience, when someone is trying to hide something, their body language gives them away. King Vorthik approached their table, his massive form towering over them. "Captain Morrison, you have saved my daughter's life. This deed will not be forgotten." Jake felt his face getting hot. "I just did what anyone would do, Your Majesty." The king's eyes seemed to glow brighter. "Perhaps, but you saw what my own guards missed. Your people have interesting gifts, Captain. I think these talks will be very productive indeed." As the evening wound down, Jake found himself thinking that this mission was going to be more complicated than anyone back on Earth had imagined. He had come here as a simple diplomat, but something told him that his role was about to change in ways he could not yet understand. Jake woke up in his crystal guest room feeling more rested than he had in months. The walls were glowing softly with morning light that seemed to come from within the crystal itself. He had been on the Zephyrian capital world of Nexera for 3 days now, and each morning brought new wonders. A gentle chime sounded, and Ambassador Kethera's voice filled the room. "Captain Morrison, Princess Zaraka requests your presence in the royal gardens. She wishes to continue your cultural exchange." Jake dressed quickly in his formal Earth diplomatic uniform and made his way through the crystal corridors. He had learned to follow the light patterns in the walls that served as direction markers. The Zephyrian palace was huge, but their navigation system was actually quite clever once you understood it. The royal gardens took Jake's breath away every time he saw them. Instead of normal plants, there were crystal trees that grew in impossible spirals, reaching toward the sky. Each tree hummed with a different musical note, creating a symphony that changed with the wind. Streams of liquid light flowed between the crystal formations, carrying energy throughout the garden. Princess Zaraka was waiting by a fountain made of floating water drops that never seemed to fall. She wore robes of deep purple that made her skin colors look even more vibrant. When she saw Jake, her face brightened and her skin shifted to warmer hues. "Good morning, Captain Morrison," she said. "I hoped you might help me understand something about human emotions." Jake joined her on a bench that grew up from the ground as they approached. "I will try, Princess. What would you like to know?" "Yesterday, When you saved me from the assassin, you acted without thinking. Dr. Carter told me this is common for humans when protecting others. But how do you make such quick decisions without calculating all possible outcomes? Jake thought about how to explain something he had never really analyzed before. We call it instinct, I guess. Sometimes you just feel that something is right or wrong, and you act on that feeling. It does not always work, but often it is faster than thinking everything through. Princess Zaraka's eyes grew wide. You make decisions based on feelings rather than logic. That sounds terrifying and wonderful at the same time. What about Zephyrians? Jake asked. How do you make decisions? We consider all available information and choose the path that provides the best logical outcome, she replied. It has served us well for many centuries, but sometimes I wonder if we miss things by always being so careful. They walked deeper into the garden, and Jake noticed that some of the crystal trees looked sick. Their usual bright colors were fading, and their musical notes sounded flat and wrong. Several Zephyrian gardeners were examining the trees with various instruments, but they looked frustrated. What is wrong with these trees? Jake asked. Princess Zaraka's skin colors dimmed with sadness. They have been dying for weeks. Our best scientists cannot determine the cause. These trees have special meaning to my family. They were planted by my great-grandmother and have never been sick before. Jake walked closer to examine the dying trees. He was not a scientist, but he had grown up on a farm before joining Earth's Space Navy. Something about the pattern of sick trees reminded him of a problem his father had dealt with crops. Princess, may I ask how long these trees have been in the same spots? They have never been moved, Captain. It is not our way to change what has worked for generations. Jake nodded and looked at the arrangement of healthy and sick trees. On Earth, we learned that plants can use up nutrients in the soil if they stay in one place too long. We rotate crops to let the land recover. What if these trees need to move to new spots occasionally? The princes looked shocked. Move the trees? But they have always been here. The energy flows are perfectly calculated for their current positions. Maybe. That is the problem, Jake suggested. What if the energy flows need to change too, like giving the crystal formations a rest? One of the Zephyrian gardeners overheard their conversation and approached. His skin was flickering with patterns. Jake was learning meant intense thinking. The human suggests something unprecedented, the gardener said, but our calculations show no other solution. Perhaps we should consider this radical approach. Princess Zaraka looked between Jake and the gardener for a long moment. Very well. We will try moving 3 of the sick trees to new locations and redirecting the energy flows. If the human's idea works, we will know within days. Jake felt nervous as teams of Zephyrians began the delicate process of relocating the crystal trees. What if he was wrong? What if he caused more damage to something that was important to the royal family? Dr. Carter and Ben Hughes joined them in the garden later that morning. Lisa was excited about the progress she was making with Zephyrian language patterns, while Ben had been documenting similarities between human and Zephyrian art. A mathematical precision in their music is incredible, Ben was saying. But when I showed them some of our jazz recordings, they were fascinated by the improvisation. They had never heard music that changed each time it was performed. Their language structure is actually quite flexible once you get past the formal elements, Dr. Carter added. I think we could teach them some human expressions that might help them communicate emotions better. Princess Zaraka listened to their reports with growing interest. You humans seem to find new possibilities in everything you examine. Is this common among your people? I suppose we do like to experiment, Jake replied. We have a saying that there is always more than one way to solve a problem. Fascinating. Zephyrian wisdom teaches that there is usually one correct path and many incorrect ones. Your approach sounds chaotic, but also full of potential. They spent the afternoon sharing more cultural information. Jake taught Princess Zaraka some basic Earth games while she showed him how to read the energy patterns in the crystal formations. Her fingers were warm when they touched his hands, and Jake found himself looking forward to these moments more than he probably should. That evening, Jake was invited to dine with the royal family in their private chambers. King Vorthik asked many questions about human military tactics and seemed impressed by concepts like improvisation and adaptation under pressure. "Your people think very quickly, Captain Morrison," the king observed. "This could be useful in our current situation." "What situation is that, Your Majesty?" Jake asked. The king's skin colors shifted to darker hues. "We have neighbors who are not as peaceful as we are. The Krex Empire has been expanding toward our border worlds. They respect only strength, and we Zephyrians have perhaps become too comfortable with peace." Jake felt a chill. "Are you expecting war?" "We hope not, but we must be prepared. Your quick thinking yesterday showed us that humans might see solutions that we would miss. Perhaps our peoples could learn from each other in more ways than cultural exchange." The next morning, Jake woke to excited chiming from the palace communication system. Princess Zaraka's voice filled his room with joy. "Captain Morrison, please come to the gardens immediately. You must see what has happened." Jake rushed to the royal gardens and found Princess Zaraka standing before the 3 crystal trees they had moved. The trees were glowing brighter than any others in the garden, and their musical notes rang clear and strong. Even more amazing new crystal buds were sprouting from their branches. "Your idea worked," Princess Zaraka said as Jake approached. Her skin was shining with colors he had never seen before. "The trees are not just healthy, they are growing stronger than ever." "I am glad I could help," Jake replied, feeling a warmth in his chest at her obvious happiness. "You did more than help, Captain. You showed us that change can bring improvement rather than just risk. This lesson could change how we approach many things." As Jake looked at the thriving crystal trees, he realized that he was starting to care about this alien world and its people in ways that went far beyond his diplomatic mission. Princess Zaraka's smile made him feel like he could solve any problem, and her obvious intelligence made every conversation a pleasure. Something was happening between them that Jake had not expected when he left Earth. The question was whether it was something that could ever lead anywhere in a galaxy where they came from different worlds and different species entirely. Jake was reviewing diplomatic reports in his crystal chamber when Ambassador Kethra arrived with an unusual request. King Vorthik wished to speak with him privately in the Crystal Sanctum, the most sacred place in the royal palace. No human had ever been invited there before. The Crystal Sanctum was located deep within the palace structure. Jake followed the ambassador through corridors that grew more elaborate as they descended. The walls here were not just crystal, but living gemstones that pulsed with their own heartbeat. The air itself seemed to shimmer with energy that made Jake's skin tingle. King Vorthik waited alone in a chamber that took Jake's breath away. The room was spherical, with a ceiling that showed the stars in real time. In the center stood a column of pure light that reached from floor to ceiling. The king's usual formal robes were replaced by simpler garments that seemed woven from starlight itself. "Captain Morrison," the king said as Jake entered, "thank you for coming. What I must tell you requires absolute privacy." Jake bowed as he had been taught. "I am honored by your trust, Your Majesty." The king gestured for Jake to sit on a crystalline chair that formed from the floor. "Tell me, Captain, what do you know of Zephyrian history?" "Only what we have learned since arriving," Jake replied. "Your people have built a great civilization that has lasted for thousands of years." King Vorthik's skin colors shifted to deeper shades. "Yes, we have achieved much. But achievement and progress are not the same thing. For the last 500 years, our society has remained essentially unchanged. We follow the same patterns, make the same choices, and produce the same results. Jake waited for the king to continue, not sure where this conversation was leading. When your people first contacted us, our scientists were curious, but not surprised. We had detected your radio signals centuries ago and predicted you would eventually develop space travel. What we did not predict was the nature of your species. What do you mean? The king stood and walked to the central column of light. As he approached it, the light grew brighter, and Jake could see images forming within it. Scenes of human history played out in the crystal light, showing wars and discoveries, and great achievements. You humans are chaos beings, the king said, but his tone made it sound like a compliment. Where we see one logical solution, you see dozens of possibilities. Where we calculate the safest path, you leap toward the most promising outcome regardless of risk. Jake watched images of human exploration and invention flowing through the crystal. Is that a problem, Your Majesty? On the contrary, Captain, it may be our salvation. The Zephyrian Empire is dying not from external threat, but from internal stagnation. We have become so efficient at maintaining what we have built that we have forgotten how to grow. The images in the crystal changed to show Zephyrian cities and worlds. Everything was beautiful and peaceful, but Jake could see what the king meant. Nothing seemed to change or develop. It was like a perfect sculpture that would never move or breathe. Your daughter, Princess Zaraka, seems different from other Zephyrians, Jake observed. King Vorthic's skin brightened. Yes, she has always been curious about change and possibility. It is why I chose her to work with your delegation. She represents the future I hope for our people. The king returned to his seat and looked directly at Jake with those star-filled eyes. Captain Morrison, I am going to ask something of you that has never been asked in Zephyrian history. Jake felt his pulse quicken. What is it, Your Majesty? I want you to marry my daughter and become a prince of the Zephyrian Empire. Jake felt like the crystal floor had disappeared beneath him. Your Majesty, I am honored, but I am not sure I understand. You have already shown us new ways of thinking. Your solution to the garden crisis demonstrated how human creativity could solve problems that had puzzled our best minds. But more than that, you have begun to change my daughter in ways that give me hope. Jake's mind raced, trying to process what he was hearing. Princess Zaraka and I are from different species, different worlds. Our scientists have studied human biology from the medical data you provided. Interbreeding is not possible, but love and partnership certainly are. More importantly, you could serve as a bridge between our peoples, bringing human innovation to Zephyrian stability. Jake stood up and walked to the crystal column, feeling overwhelmed. What does Princess Zaraka think about this idea? I have not spoken to her yet. The choice must be yours first. If you agree, then I will discuss it with her. But Captain, I believe she cares for you more than protocol should allow. Jake thought about his conversations with Princess Zaraka over the past weeks. He had felt something growing between them, but had assumed it was impossible given their different natures. Now the king was suggesting it might not only be possible, but necessary. Your Majesty, what about my duties to Earth? I am here as a representative of my government. King Vorthic smiled, and his skin showed warm golden patterns. Captain, your government sent you here to establish good relations with the Zephyrian Empire. What could be better for relations than a marriage alliance? You would not be abandoning Earth. You would be serving it in a new way. Jake felt torn between excitement and terror. The idea of staying here with Princess Zaraka appealed to him more than he wanted to admit. But becoming alien royalty was far beyond anything he had ever imagined for his life. May I have time to consider this, Your Majesty? Of course. But do not take too long, Captain. The Krex Empire grows bolder along our borders, and we need the advantages that human thinking could provide. Also, there are those among my own people who would prefer we remain isolated from all aliens, including humans. That evening, Jake sat in his chamber, trying to make sense of his feelings. Dr. Carter and Ben Hughes noticed his distraction during their daily briefing, but he could not tell them what was troubling him yet. 2 days later, Princess Zaraka found him in the Royal Library studying Zephyrian law and customs. She sat beside him at the crystal desk, and her presence made it hard for Jake to concentrate on his reading. "You seem troubled, Captain Morrison," she said. "Is there something I can help with?" Jake looked at her beautiful alien face and felt his heart racing. "Princess, may I ask you a personal question?" "Of course." "When we first met, did you think it was possible for beings from different worlds to understand each other?" Princess Zaraka was quiet for a moment. "I hoped it was possible." "Why do you ask?" Jake took a deep breath. "Your father has made me an offer that would change both our lives forever." Her skin colors shifted rapidly through patterns Jake was learning, meant intense emotion. "What kind of offer?" "He wants me to marry you and become a Zephyrian prince." Princess Zaraka went very still, and her skin faded to pale silver. For a long moment, Jake thought he had made a terrible mistake by telling her. Then she spoke in a whisper. "What did you tell him?" "I said I needed time to think." "But Princess, I need to know how you feel about the idea." She turned to face him fully, and Jake saw that her eyes were brighter than usual. "Captain Morrison, Jake, I have spent my life following Zephyrian customs and logic. I have always done what was expected and proper." Jake felt his heart sinking. "And this would not be proper?" "No, it would be unprecedented, shocking, and completely against tradition." Her skin suddenly blazed with brilliant colors. "And I want it more than anything I have ever wanted in my life." Jake felt relief and joy flooding through him. "Then you would consider it?" "I have been considering little else since we met," she admitted. "You make me feel things that Zephyrian teachings say are illogical and impractical. But they also make me feel more alive than I ever have before." Jake reached out and took her hand. Her skin was warm and seemed to pulse with gentle energy. "Princess Zaraka, I think I am falling in love with you, and I with you, Jake Morrison. But there will be challenges. Many of my people will oppose this union. Some may even try to prevent it." As if summoned by her words, General Corax Vel appeared in the library doorway. The military leader's skin was dark with anger, and his eyes blazed with hostile light. "Princess, you forget yourself," he said coldly. "Consorting with aliens brings shame on the royal house." Princess Zaraka stood gracefully, but Jake could see tension in her posture. "General Corax Vel, you forget that these aliens are our invited guests." "Guests, yes, but not potential husbands. The purity of Zephyrian bloodlines must be preserved." Jake stood as well, trying to keep his voice calm. "General, we mean no disrespect to your customs. You mean everything disrespectful human. Your very presence here corrupts our ancient ways." General Corax Vel turned and left without another word, but Jake could feel the hostility radiating from him. Princess Zaraka moved closer to Jake, and he could see worry in her eyes. "He represents those who fear change," she said quietly. "If we choose this path, Jake, we must be prepared to face them together." Jake stood before the Council of Elders in the great assembly hall, feeling smaller than he ever had in his life. The ancient Zephyrians sat in a circle around him, their skin glowing with patterns that spoke of centuries of wisdom and tradition. King Vorthok had announced his intention to make Jake a prince through marriage to Princess Zaraka, but the council demanded that he first prove his worthiness through the ancient trials. "Human," spoke Elder Vexma, the oldest of the council members. "No alien has ever attempted the trials of royal worthiness. You may not survive them." Jake kept his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I understand the risks, Elder, but I wish to try." Elder Kothra leaned forward, his skin showing skeptical patterns. The trials were designed for Zephyrians who have spent lifetimes preparing. You have been among us for mere weeks. Ben I will have to learn quickly, Jake replied. Princess Zaraka sat in the royal section of the hall, and Jake could see worry in her changing skin colors. King Vorthik remained impassive, but Jake thought he detected approval in the monarch's star-filled eyes. The first trial was the test of wisdom, set to begin the next morning. Jake spent the night studying Zephyrian philosophy with Princess Zaraka as his guide. She explained the complex logical frameworks that had guided their civilization for millennia. The test will present you with an ancient puzzle that has challenged Zephyrian minds for generations, she told him. You must find a solution that honors both tradition and progress. The test of wisdom took place in a chamber lined with crystal, screens that displayed scrolling Zephyrian text. Jake was presented with the paradox of the eternal garden, a philosophical problem about how to maintain perfection while allowing for growth and change. According to Zephyrian tradition, the perfect garden needed no alteration. But if nothing ever changed, how could new beauty emerge? Generations of scholars had debated this question without resolution. Some argued for absolute preservation, while others suggested careful, controlled change. Jake thought about his experience with the dying crystal trees in the royal garden. He had suggested moving them, not because the old arrangement was wrong, but because even perfect things needed renewal to stay healthy. The answer is not choosing between perfection and change, Jake told the assembled council. The answer is understanding that change can serve perfection. A garden that never changes may look perfect for a while, but eventually it will stagnate and die. True perfection includes the ability to grow and renew itself. The elders discussed his answer in rapid Zephyrian while their skin colors flickered. With intense debate, finally Elder Vexma spoke. Your reasoning is unorthodox human, but it contains wisdom. You passed the first trial. The second trial was the test of courage, which would take place in the void caverns beneath the palace. These ancient caves were filled with dangers that tested both physical and mental strength. Jake would have to navigate the maze-like passages and retrieve a sacred crystal from the deepest chamber. Princess Zaraka was not allowed to accompany him, but she met with him before he descended into the caverns. The caves will try to confuse and frighten you, she warned. They respond to mental energy and can create illusions based on your fears. Remember that courage is not the absence of fear, but action despite fear. Jake entered the void caverns through a crystal portal that sealed behind him. The passages were darker than anything he had experienced on the crystal world. His footsteps echoed strangely, and the air felt thick with ancient power. The first challenge came when the passage split into multiple tunnels. Jake had no map and no way to know which path was correct. He closed his eyes and tried to feel which direction called to him. Human intuition had served him well so far, and he hoped it would not fail him now. The tunnel he chose led to a vast chamber, where the walls seemed to move with shadowy forms. Jake realized he was seeing projections of his own fears. Images of failure, disappointment, and loss swirled around him, trying to convince him to turn back. One shadow took the form of his old commanding officer, telling him he was abandoning his duty to Earth. Another showed Princess Zaraka rejecting him for being too alien. A third displayed Earth's government, declaring him a traitor for choosing an alien world over his home. Jake forced himself to walk forward through the illusions. These are not real, he said aloud. I know what I am fighting for and why. The shadows grew more intense, trying to overwhelm him with visions of everything he feared losing. But Jake had learned something from his time with the Zephyrians about finding calm within chaos. He focused on his breathing and kept moving toward the deeper passages in the final chamber. Jake found the sacred crystal suspended in a beam of pure light. But as he approached it, the chamber began to collapse. Rocks fell from the ceiling and the floor cracked beneath his feet. This was the ultimate test, whether he would risk everything to complete his mission. Jake ran forward as the cavern fell apart around him. A boulder crashed down where he had been standing a second before. He leaped over a crevice that opened in the floor and rolled to avoid falling debris. With one final desperate jump, he grasped the crystal and felt its warm energy flow through him. The moment he touched the crystal, the cavern stopped collapsing. Jake found himself standing in a peaceful chamber, with the crystal glowing softly in his hands. He had passed the second trial. The third trial was the test of spirit, which required him to commune with the crystal heart, the great energy source that powered all of Zephyrian civilization. This was considered the most difficult trial because it demanded a deep spiritual connection to forces beyond normal understanding. Jake was brought to the chamber of the crystal heart, where a massive crystal formation pulsed with rainbow light. Ancient priests chanted in harmonies that made the air itself vibrate. Princess Zaraka was allowed to guide him to the crystal, but could not help him make the connection. "You must open your mind completely," she whispered. "The crystal heart will judge whether your spirit is compatible with Zephyrian energy." Jake placed his hands on the warm crystal surface and tried to quiet his human thoughts. At first nothing happened, and he worried that his alien mind could not connect to Zephyrian spiritual forces. Then gradually he began to feel something like a distant music playing at the edge of his consciousness. The music grew stronger, and Jake realized he was hearing the combined spiritual energy of the entire Zephyrian Empire. Every living crystal, every flowing energy stream, every beating heart was part of this vast symphony. But instead of trying to join it, exactly as a Zephyrian would, Jake let his human nature blend with it in his own way. The result surprised everyone present. Jake's connection to the crystal heart created new harmonies that had never existed before. The priests stopped chanting and stared as the great crystal blazed with unprecedented colors. Jake felt the acceptance of the crystal heart flowing through him, along with something else, recognition that his different perspective could add strength to the whole rather than weaken it. When Jake finally opened his eyes, he saw wonder on every Zephyrian face in the chamber. He had not just passed the trial, he had expanded what they thought was possible. But even as Jake celebrated his success with Princess Zaraka and her father, he knew that General Corax Vel and his supporters would not give up easily. That night, as he rested in his chambers, preparing for the official ceremony, Jake heard urgent voices in the corridor. Outside, Dr. Carter burst into his room with Ben Hughes close behind. "Jake, something is wrong," she said breathlessly. "We intercepted communications that suggest someone is planning to sabotage tomorrow's ceremony." "General Corax Vel?" Jake asked. "We think so, but we cannot prove it yet," Ben replied. "The transmissions were encoded, but they mentioned preventing the contamination of royal bloodlines." Jake felt cold fear in his stomach. What kind of sabotage? "We are not sure, but Jake, if they cannot stop the marriage through legal means, they might try more direct methods." As Jake absorbed this news, he realized that passing the trials had only been the beginning. Now he would have to prove he could protect not just himself, but Princess Zaraka and the future they hoped to build together. The morning of the wedding ceremony arrived with Nexera's 3 sons, painting the crystal spires in brilliant colors Jake had never seen before. He stood in his prepared chambers, wearing robes that combined Earth military dress with Zephyrian formal wear. The garments had been specially designed by Princess Zaraka herself, and seemed to glow with their own inner light. Dr. Carter and Ben Hughes helped him with the final preparations, while keeping watch for any signs of the sabotage they suspected. "The security teams have been alerted," Lisa told him quietly. "But be ready for anything, Jake." The ceremony was to take place in the Grand Crystal Cathedral, a massive structure that could hold thousands of beings. Representatives from across the Zephyrian Empire had come to witness this historic union, while Earth had sent a full diplomatic delegation to show their support. As Jake walked through the palace corridors toward the cathedral, he felt the weight of what was happening. He was not just marrying the woman he loved, he was becoming a bridge between two civilizations. The responsibility felt enormous, but Princess Zaraka's smile, when he saw her waiting at the altar, made everything else fade. Away. She wore traditional Zephyrian wedding robes that seemed woven from captured starlight. Her skin glowed with the brightest colors Jake had ever seen on her, displaying joy and love in patterns that needed no translation. When their eyes met across the vast cathedral, Jake knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them. Together, King Vorthik performed the ceremony himself, using ancient words that had bound Zephyrian couples for thousands of years. But he also included new vows that Jake and Princess Zaraka had written together, combining human concepts of love with Zephyrian ideas of eternal partnership. Just as they were about to exchange rings, the cathedral's crystal walls suddenly went dark. Emergency lighting flickered on, and Jake heard the sound of weapons being drawn by the royal guards. General Corax Vel appeared in the main aisle, flanked by a group of Zephyrian soldiers. "This ceremony is an abomination," the general declared. "I cannot allow the royal bloodline to be contaminated by alien influence." King Vorthik stepped forward, his skin blazing with royal authority. "General Corax Vel, you forget yourself. This union has been approved by the Council of Elders and blessed by the Crystal Heart itself. The old ways are dying, Your Majesty, and this human is the disease that will kill them," General Corax Vel replied. "I have support from many who believe as I do." Jake felt Princess Zaraka's hand squeeze his and realized this was the moment he had been preparing for since he arrived on this world. He stepped forward, keeping his voice calm and steady. "General, I understand your concerns about change. But I am not here to destroy Zephyrian culture. I am here to help it grow stronger." General Corax Vel's weapons powered up with a dangerous whine. "Pretty words human, but actions matter more." What happened next surprised everyone, including Jake himself. Princess Zaraka moved between her husband-to-be and the general, her own skin now glowing with royal power that Jake had never seen before. "General Corax Vel, I am still your princess, and you will show proper respect," she commanded. "This human has proven his worth through the ancient trials. He has shown wisdom, courage, and spiritual connection. What more proof do you need?" "I need proof that he will not lead us to ruin, Princess." Jake had an inspiration. "Then let me show you, General. The Krex Empire threatens your border worlds, correct? Let me help you develop new defensive strategies that combine human tactics with Zephyrian technology. If my ideas fail, you can exile me, but if they succeed, you must accept this union." General Corax Vel hesitated, clearly not expecting this offer. King Vorthik seized the opportunity. "An excellent proposal. General Corax Vel, you have 3 days to test the humans' military suggestions against our current plans. The Council of Elders will judge which approach is superior." Seeing that he had lost support, General Corax Vel lowered his weapons. 3 days, then. But I warn you all that this experiment will end in disaster." The wedding ceremony resumed with even greater meaning now that the opposition had been openly faced. When Jake and Princess Zaraka finally exchanged vows and rings, the cathedral erupted in celebrations that lasted for hours. Music from both cultures blended together, creating new harmonies that delighted everyone present. That night, as Jake and his new wife walked in the royal gardens under ferns, Nexara's star-filled sky, she asked him about his promise to help with military strategy. "Do you really think human tactics can help us against the Krex Empire?" Princess Zaraka asked. "I think the combination of human adaptability and Zephyrian precision could be very powerful," Jake replied. Your people are excellent at planning and coordination, but sometimes you need to be able to improvise when plans do not work. Over the next 3 days, Jake worked with Zephyrian military planners to develop new defensive strategies. He suggested using smaller, more mobile units instead of massive formations. He recommended creating multiple backup plans for every scenario. Most importantly, he taught them how to make quick decisions when communication with command was impossible. The test came when General Corax Vel ran war game simulations, comparing the traditional Zephyrian approach with Jake's hybrid strategies. To everyone's amazement, including Jake's own, the new tactics proved far more effective against simulated Krex attacks. General Corax Vel stood before the Council of Elders, looking defeated but honest. The human strategies are superior to our traditional methods. I withdraw my objections to this union. King Vorthix smiled broadly. Then it is settled. Captain Jake Morrison is now Prince Jake of the Zephyrian Empire. The months that followed were busy with establishing new diplomatic protocols between Earth and the Zephyrian Empire. Jake found himself serving as translator, not just of languages, but of entire ways of thinking. He helped human engineers understand Zephyrian crystal technology while teaching Zephyrian scientists about human innovation methods. The first joint human Zephyrian colony was established on a world that both species could inhabit comfortably. The colonists worked together on projects that neither could have accomplished alone, creating cities that were both practical and beautiful. 2 years after the wedding, Princess Zaraka announced that she was expecting a child. The baby would be adopted rather than biological, but would be raised as the heir to both human and Zephyrian traditions. They chose an orphaned human infant from the joint colonies and an abandoned Zephyrian crystal child, presenting them to the galaxy as symbols of unity. Jake often stood in the royal gardens watching the two children play together and marveling at how natural their friendship seemed. The human child, Marcus, was teaching the Zephyrian child, Kethlin, about games and laughter, while Kethlin showed Marcus how to read crystal energy patterns. They will grow up seeing differences as sources of strength rather than division. Princess Zaraka observed as she joined Jake in watching their children. Perhaps their generation will achieve things neither of ours could imagine. King Vorthik formally named Jake as his successor, making clear that the future of the Zephyrian Empire lay in cooperation rather than isolation. Jake began learning the complex duties of kingship while maintaining his role as Earth's permanent ambassador to the Crystal Worlds. The Krex Empire made several attempts to test Zephyrian defenses, but found them much stronger than expected. Combination of human tactical flexibility and Zephyrian technological superiority proved too difficult for them to overcome. Eventually, they sought peace treaties rather than continue facing such effective resistance. Jake's transformation from simple ship captain to alien royalty inspired other humans to seek deeper connections with alien civilizations. Earth established new policies encouraging cultural integration rather than just trade relationships. Several other mixed species marriages followed Jake and Princess Zaraka's example, creating a network of connections across the galaxy. On quiet evenings, Jake would sit in his study reading reports from the joint colonies and diplomatic missions. Sometimes he could hardly believe how far he had come from his original mission to simply establish trade relations. But then Princess Zaraka would enter the room with their children, and he would remember that the greatest adventures come not from conquering new worlds, but from building bridges between different peoples. The last entry in Jake's personal log that year read simply this: "Today, I realized that home is not a place you come from, but a place you help create with the people you love. I came to this world as a visitor, but I have become something. I never expected a founding father of a new kind of civilization where differences are celebrated rather than feared. The future belongs to those who can see past the boundaries that separate species and find the common hopes that unite all thinking beings." As Jake looked out at the crystal spires of his adopted world, glowing under alien stars, he knew that this was only the beginning of humanity's greatest adventure, the adventure of learning to live not just among the stars, but among the infinite diversity of minds that called those stars home.